To bring you back up to speed then, maybe on where we are, we've been talking about two major changes which resulted in why the times were right for a new way of seeing experience. The first was a change in psychology, and now Dewey is going to move on and talk about a change in how experience itself was starting to be seen. So I want you to recall for just a minute the ancient Greek philosophical model. Right? Remember, that model does not see experience changing in response to theoretical advances. Again, there might be occasional gradual improvements among craftspeople, say, or maybe there's a sudden divine inspiration about some different way to do things. But there's not in Greek philosophy this mutual, dynamic, interactive, back and forth exchange between theory and practice. Right? That gradual shift really comes into full flower once we move from the empirical to the experimental scientific approaches, right? In, after the modern philosophical period, roughly the age of industry and technological advance. Old experience is now seen critically. It's seen as potentially useful, right? Experience is no longer just what happened to me, but it's a means or it's a tool with which I can improve my future experience, right? It's like what you learn from an experience you then put to work. You think, wow, that was weird, that was odd. Gosh, what was that? Or what just happened to me? And then you try to do something with it, right? You try to solve a problem or even create, innovate something. In other words, this new way of seeing experience was not just the passive reception of the world's impact on you. It is a chance to use experience, right? To grab it and to use it. Remember Bacon's phrase, knowledge is power. Experience is power. So experience then accumulates enough credibility so as to be self-sufficient. Right? And this is really Dewey's main point, I think, in the chapter. He writes, the very fact of experience thus includes the process by which it directs itself in its own betterment. Right? The very fact of experience thus includes the process by which it directs itself in its own betterment. Right? And so perhaps the key for experience then is not only that we can get better at it or better at science by using it, but that experience contains within itself the seeds even for moral progress, right? We can learn by experience morally. Right? So Dewey is essentially collapsing a fact-value distinction here. He is taking values from the realm of the ethereal or from the realm of eternal moral law, and he's saying, no, values and moral experience are within experience generally, and we do not need transcendental or extra experiential guides in order to improve, in order to find just ways to act or better ways to live. So what then on this picture becomes of reason? Well, for Dewey, reason doesn't go away, but it is transformed. It's transmogrified. Right? Reason is no longer first or above experience. It's no longer the divine spark within us. It is experimental intelligence. So for Dewey, reasoning is a process, it's a function in human life, it's a way we act, it's sets of habits. And it gives us the ability to conduct ourselves using what he calls active and planning thought. And this all happens within experience. This kind of thinking still has plenty of work to do. Moral work, social work, creative work, right? Imaginative work. And so here's I think what I think is probably the key quote in the whole chapter. Dewey says, concrete suggestions arising from past experiences, developed and matured in light of the needs and deficiencies of the present, employed as aims and methods of specific reconstruction, and tested by success or failure in accomplishing this task of readjustment suffice. To such empirical suggestions used in constructive fashion for new ends, the name intelligence is given. So again, intelligence is a process. It's a habit, or it can become a habit. It's not the spark of the divine, or the most essential thing about humanity, or what's singular to humanity. As James said of truth, it is an ongoing cumulative action and attitude. It's not rationalization, right there. That's the Dewey's word for the ability to use reason to hide particular or ugly facts so that you can come out with a beautiful whole. Right? You might think of some of the dilemma of determinism passages in James, or the ability to sort of say, well, yes, this was a terrible event, but in the end, everything fits together, even with the ugly, even with the tragic or the cruel. Right? So Dewey concludes the chapter then by relating these topics back to his main one, the reconstruction of philosophy. So what is philosophy then, and what does it have to do with experience? Well, for Dewey, the purpose of philosophy is to mediate between, on the one hand, our need to escape from suffocating customs, suffocating rules, and on the other hand, our desire to conserve those norms and institutions which still represent our values and our achievements. So philosophy needs to pay attention to novel and new facts while still finding relations and connections between facts. Philosophy needs, Dewey says, to discover the value that is implicit in present experience while devising ways to change our environment and our future experience to create more and new values in the future. All the while it does this, it must refuse that ancient urge, that ancient philosophical urge to go beyond or outside experience. So that, in a nutshell, is the chapter. So I'd like to just offer a summary of this chapter because I think it's important and maybe helpful just to end with this. This chapter covered how and why it's possible to use experience as a guide in science and in moral life when older empiricists wouldn't use it. It explains why experience is a guide if it's understood in a new light. Dewey tells a historical story about how traditional philosophies saw experience, especially the Greeks, the empiricists, and the rationalists. And he talks about how a new conception of experience was made possible by a psychology rooted in biology and by changes in the way we conceive of experience itself. He explains how this new conception of experience is sufficient unto itself, and that reason, understood in light of this new conception of experience, is transformed into experimental intelligence. Finally, he talks about philosophy's purpose, and that is to help mediate between custom and discovery to enable and direct new growth. And again, remember, the main thrust of this entire book is moral and social growth. The solving of practical and political problems which plague humanity is philosophy's main goal. It's job one for philosophy. And it can do that job with a new conception of experience. So that's the end of the lecture on Dewey's Chapter 4 of Reconstruction in Philosophy. Thanks for watching. I hope it was helpful, and I look forward to talking to you about it.